Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for coming along to this session. It's really glad to see you all here. I have to admit I am feeling quite emotional today, a bit sad perhaps. I was really hoping this year that we'd all be in a big, vibrant space together. You know, we've been working for so long, building good food and farming systems, and so many of us are really old friends now, and it feels so sad to not be in a space with everyone feeling that energy that really kickstarts this year, the year always. But it is what it is, and I'm so grateful simultaneously that we can do this via the technology with these amazing tech support folks helping us out. Thanks for all of that and for transforming the conference so quickly. Yeah, and I guess, I was reflecting on this today because I have been quite emotional today, probably in part because of the conference, but also there is just a lot to be emotional about in this world, and the tears have been flowing quite freely today. And to be honest, I don't intend to stop them or hide them if they happen to continue during this session. I'd rather just show up with you all and be real. And so, yeah, thanks. I'm really grateful to share a space with you. And we're here to talk about the role of data in supply chains, in short food supply chains. In the context of the world that we live in, you know, that we all feel in our bones, the mass extinction, the collapse and regeneration at the same time, it might feel like data can be a topic that perhaps feels more aligned with the status quo than with the revolution. But we're here to talk about data in the context of the revolution. So I think one thing that plays on my mind often is that even with all of the amazing work that we do, everyone at this conference building great food systems across the UK and across the world, we're still only really talking about 1%, give or take, of food retail in the UK. So, and that, you know, that means that the vast majority of food that is being produced and eaten is going through very centralized and very siloed supply chains. And they're very different to the food systems that we're creating. Our food systems are diverse, you know, radically diverse business models, diverse crops, diversity on farms. And if our food systems are going to start to bring in some of this 99% over into our way of farming and distributing, we need to figure out how we can scale. And I think that's really the driving question behind these conversations that we want to have here today is how can we scale while keeping the amazing diversity, ecosystem diversity and economic diversity that our food systems represent? What does it mean to unlock diversity at scale? And in particular, can data be a tool that helps us to unlock diversity at scale? So yeah, we're not talking about small things. We're talking about some of the big questions here. And I'm just really thrilled to have such an amazing panel of people to have these conversations with. It's going to be a bit of a conversational style session, but I think there'll be a few slides popping up as well. But yeah, feel free as well to ask questions in the chat as we go. If any pop into your head, don't necessarily wait till the end, but we will have lots of time to answer them at the end. That's our intention. Yeah, so joining us on this incredible panel today, we have the most excellent Kath, who I'm sure everybody knows, heading up Sustain. We have Duncan Catchpole from Cambridge Organics, which is a multifaceted and systemic approach to bringing good food into Cambridge. Really great to have you here. And then we have Rochelle Arnould coming from France, which she was going to come all the way to the conference and be with us in person. So Rochelle is part of the Data Food Consortium group in France, who've been pioneering data-based collaborations in sustainable food systems for some years. So she's going to talk about some of the learnings and experiences there. And we also have Sophie Paterson, who's joining from food data collaboration work that we're pioneering in the UK. And Sophie's got some exciting things to tell us about projects afoot there. But yeah, without further ado, let's get started. And of course, if anybody wants to do the classic introducing yourself in the chat thing, you might already be doing it. I'm not looking, but feel very free. Yeah. So I guess to start, what would be really good to do is to just kind of have a look at some of the economic landscape that surrounds the food and farming system. And I'd like to pass to you, Kath, for this one. In terms of this kind of introduction and this desire to bring diversity to scale our diversity in our food system, what does that look like to you? What does diversity look like to you on the economic side of the food system?
My goodness me.
Big question.
First of all, Lynne, thank you for mentioning emotion, because I was weeping over dung beetles in the previous session. Oh. So there is definitely a level of emotion flowing around at the moment. And I do get very excited about data. And also how that supports diverse agroecological food trading. I suppose I would say that in my day job, I do a lot of the stuff about how data drives policy. So about how that feeds into people talking about jobs and about land use and all those things. But in my more than a day job, I'm very interested in how agroecological food is traded, which obviously is very relevant to what we're talking about here, and how we can make the practice of agroecological food production economically viable through values-based and farmer-focused trading systems. Yes, it's 1%. Is it? There's probably more than that, because people don't record their data, do they? They don't report it. It goes unseen, unreported, because it is so diverse and dispersed. We need to gang up. When we gang up, we're stronger. As Nimo Bassi reminded us in the video at the beginning of the Oxford Rural Farming Conference. Actually, I think that's when I started crying. So our big question is how we can drive the market for agroecological food through supply chains and trading mechanisms that put farmers, and hence also when they're agroecological, the climate and nature, centre stage. And the bit of the more than my day job I pursue to look at that and support diversity of crops, people, farmers, trading is I'm a trustee of Growing Communities, and that's this was my bedtime reading last night, the Growing Communities annual report, totally data driven, full of them. And it didn't send me to sleep, which is a £2.5 million turnover social enterprise based here in Hackney, which also helped to instigate the Better Food Traders Network, which is also a member of the Open Food Network, etc. And we did a session this morning, amazing, pioneering multi-million-pound eco-retailers from Growing Communities in Hackney, Locavore in Glasgow, Better Food in Bristol, telling their stories for how this sector can scale up, and in a good way that retains values and builds community. Are you wanting me to just introduce myself in this, or shall I go in?
No, dive in. You're diving in beautifully. Continue.
Okay, so I also wanted to say that I'm a proud not-for-profit shareholder in numerous community food initiatives. This isn't about me. I'm thinking about how we invest our time, love and money. So that includes Scotland the Bread, Ford Hall Farm, the Community Farm, Luminary Bakery, the Our Field Composite Cross Grain Initiative. I had to practice saying that without getting my tongue tangled. And that last one is in honour of our dear and much missed Martin Wolf at Wakeling. So I always like to see it at RFC, but shan't be able to, obviously, these days. That's what we all need to be. We need to use our money and our time and our love to help good food growing, trading and distribution systems to thrive. And preparing for this session, I was really struck by how well established some of these initiatives now are. Duncan, you've been going for years now, plugging away at making your local food hub work. We're onto a good thing here. The first farmers market in the UK, I looked it up on the internet last night. It started in Bath 25 years ago this year. Growing Communities, Locavore and Better Food Traders have been working for over 20 years and have multi-million-pound turnovers. People like Essential and Suma, we sometimes forget them because they've just been plugging away in the background along for even longer, selling fair and sustainably produced whole food. We now understand much better what trading models work. And we've entered a really pivotal time when we need to make that good values-driven, farmer-focused, agroecology-focused supply chains and trading work. And to get it to households, to businesses, to institutions, acting as good food citizens with their money and their time and their love. But we need to make the money work and fast-track people to becoming a nation of good food producers. Eco shopkeepers was a lovely phrase that came up in our session earlier. Veg box scheme managers and cooperative coordinators, and yes, food hub organisers like lovely Duncan. And it's a new year, so I'm in a sort of looking back as well as looking forward sort of mode. And over the past decade, I'd say there has been a huge resurgence in community-led solutions to food quality, accessibility and connectivity, community food gardens. We're now helping support over 2,000 of them in London. Not London alone, I mean, we do a much bigger network through lots of other people doing it in other cities as well. And that is deliberately supporting the move towards there being more people who want to run peri-urban market gardens. And we can, when we get organised together, we can liberate that land into public use, because we can go knocking on doors en masse rather than individually. 20 years under our belts shows that we have things that we can be convincing with, and data helps drive that. And in some places, and I'd mention Bristol, London, Wales, Scotland, Manchester, Brighton and Hove, these are starting to join up into more coherent programmes that can achieve change at more scale. For example, a lot of the box schemes in London are now joining together to be part of a wholesale initiative called the Better Food Shed. Wholesaler, we're running a values-driven wholesaler? Fantastic. That's where the numbers start ranking up. But that's not everywhere, of course, and we can't just be diamonds of good practice in a sea of mediocrity, as my friend at Cardiff University often says. Everyone doing this is fighting against a system that makes things difficult to achieve, particularly the economics of that system. It's like climbing a mountain. I've said perhaps even a mountain range, because you always have to go down and go up and to go down and go up to make these things work. Lots of things are needed to make good food growing, trading, distribution happen at scale. And that's what this whole conference is addressing, of course: land, soil, growers, money, farm advice, skills. But this session is about data, and data that fuels better food trading. And data does play a crucial role. I think it's a bit like the money. Data and good data management is one of the oils that make the whole machinery work. Sorry to use such a mechanistic analogy, I'll think of a better one. Almost every food trading or indeed food growing scheme I've ever been involved with or watched grow has in some way started with somebody determined to get started and needing to go out and find information. Sometimes that's in a really practical way. It takes a lot of legwork, sometimes literally. I have in my mind's eye, because she's a friend of mine, Julie Brown from Growing Communities setting off on her bicycle around Hackney to look over fences, literally look over fences and map the available land for food growing, which are now, over 20 years later, iconic Hackney salad growing sites integrated into a well-established food trading scheme and training over 70 agroecological market gardeners for the future. But where was the land ownership, suitability for food growing and availability of that land data that would have made her task so much easier? Why did she have to get on her bike? I have in my mind's eye the indomitable Lady Caroline Cranbrook, who some people will know, who went around interviewing local businesses in Suffolk. I think she went by bike or perhaps by foot, revealing the food web that keeps local economies alive, and successfully, therefore, withstanding the arrival of a Tesco. She used that evidence to go up against the planning application from a major Tesco that was aiming to pull the rug out from the local food system. Where is the local economic resilience data that understands and values the things that connect to those? We've got to get better at telling those stories. Julie, Lady Caroline Cranbrook are two iconic inspirations for me in people who got the data themselves. So I also have in my mind's eye the dozens, perhaps hundreds of people over the years who we've been in contact with through Sustain, who've set about listing public sector food procurement opportunities, set up local food directories, mapped local food producers, driven vans to aggregate food supplies, set up ethical wholesalers to manage the flow of food, data, information, connections, and importantly, the invoices. We must remember this comes down to some very practical things as well. Data is as much a part of the local food infrastructure as are food hubs and abattoirs that are being talked about in other sessions. And data drives sort of, what I think of it as data drives two-way flows of information. So accurate ordering that can inform planting plans for the food growers, who can then grow the right amount and type of food that will be attractive to customers and make those veg bags and varied and delicious so that they are consumer focused as well as farmer focused. And also fill those shelves and veg bags in the training schemes and avoid waste because there's been good ordering. Good data systems also drive management of payments, as I mentioned. The economics of this doesn't work unless we're also fair traders. None of this works unless we walk our talk, pay fairly, pay on time. On this, I'm a big fan of the dynamic food procurement system that is being talked about at this conference, that understands that farmers need to be paid now, not later. Farmers selling into NHS food procurement systems on their own can sometimes wait to see their invoices paid for 3 to 6 months. That simply just doesn't work in the precarious and seasonal nature of smaller farm incomes, where people don't have other type forms of income to balance the books. Finally, I think good data underpins really good communications. This is where my friend Julie Brown's annual report comes in. Good communications are essential. Everything we do is about cultivating good relationships and being able to tell good stories about where the food comes from, the magic that good food trading weaves when it goes well, and what the benefits are as a result. Communication between traders and farmers, between traders and customers, between farmers and customers, between traders and supporters such as local authorities, landlords, landowners, people contributing to crowdfunding schemes, community share offers, and also to charitable grant funders, because sometimes we may need to support charitable elements of the work and need to see that their money is being well spent. We need to be able to show the benefits of what we do to gain our place in policy and in premises and in access to land. And some of that is storytelling, and some of that storytelling is the numbers. So taking a look at this annual report, this will serve as my high-tech PowerPoint presentation for the day. Growing Communities tells us they've packed nearly 1 million bags of fruit and veg. They tell us they saved 250,000 pieces of plastic packaging. They tell us that 26 farmers have had good incomes from coming to the farmers market, and 38 other producers have been able to test their products. It tells us that they've trained 70 people in food growing skills on those salad growing sites. It says that about £70,000 of surplus food has been donated to local kitchens to help with refugees, to help with people who are needing good food. It tells us that 85% of the farmers supported by Growing Communities have increased their turnover, and each of them is employing 4 more people because of the trading scheme. These are the kinds of storytellings that we need to do, and they need to be driven by the data, as well as managing our accounts and our employment. And we do sometimes have to be wizards of communication, reinterpreting our story depending on who needs to hear it. So from a sustain point of view, I'm going back to my day job, I want to be able to talk about the value and volume of local and agroecological food sector to policymakers. And I sometimes struggle to do so because the data isn't necessarily available. And I'm sorry to say, but they currently dismiss it as trivial and marginal. That 1% figure gets rather stuck in people's heads. So we're looking at developing data and systems at sustain in our context to illustrate the value of local and agroecological food producers, infrastructure and trading systems. And we want to present that in a way that fuels advocacy, the lobbying of MPs and local authorities who have control over the money, the premises, the land and the support that's needed. We've got a vision in our heads of presenting this on a map, so you can bung in your postcode, you can find out the value of the local food system in your local area, and also the value of the procurement contract, the value in terms of jobs, in terms of the money, in terms of the benefits to wildlife and to climate. We hope that these kind of things can help us defend what we have and help people grow more of what we want, grow the food, grow the businesses. We want to be able to tell better stories and in a way that policymakers can hear, because they can't hear this stuff at the moment. So from a better food trading point of view, my more than a day job, I want more agroecological farmers to be connected to better food trading systems, run brilliantly well and data-driven, providing reliable market outlets and paying on time. Our job here is to be the bit, the fix, the bit in the middle, between the good food production and the good food consumption, the thing that makes it all flow. I mean, the bit that gets agroecologically grown food to market and then to plate, and a loyal market fueled by the stories, fueled by the sense of being part of a growing movement that is making change happen, that can help drive the rapid transition to agroecology that we all need. And data really does have a key role to play in that transition. But as Julie would prove on her bicycle on her own, we can't do it all alone. We don't have the time to develop data priorities and systems from scratch and do all of these things all at once. So we do need to collaborate. And hence programs such as Better Food Traders and Open Food Network are necessary and truly inspiring. I could get emotional right now about data. Isn't that sad? Well, no, it isn't, because it is the fuel that drives this stuff. And it's helping people to do the legwork in a way where we all start moving in the same direction. I'll stop there. You can probably tell I'm really keen on this stuff. I suppose what I really want to understand is how we can tailor the data in a way that helps good food traders to really thrive, that we can do the joining up bit so that people don't have to do all the legwork themselves, and that we can understand the various markets that we're trying to sell to and the ways that we can improve good communications, both for the growing plans at the farming end and for the purchasing at the consumption end. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Kath. Yeah, I think that was an absolutely wonderful context setting, and also just really great to explore the different roles of data, because I think that's incredibly important. There's the kind of business processes side of data where a lot of energy is wasted, and there's potentially a lot of opportunity to connect and collaborate. And then, like, there's also this feeding into a storytelling perspective that is so important for individual businesses to tell their story to their communities, and so important to kind of be able to link that data together and feed it up to a bigger narrative that we can take to policymakers and bring that into a policy context. So yeah, absolutely excellent. I think it's a really good opportunity to jump over to you, Duncan, to start to explore some of the kind of practical and tangible on the ground business process aspects of this. So it probably would be useful to start with you giving a little introduction to what you've been doing, building inspiring and successful local food businesses around Cambridge for so long. If you could give a wee introduction, that'd be awesome.
Sure, yes. Well, I guess I'm going to start the introduction of myself to give a little bit of context. Whereas Kath said that she was excited by data, I really couldn't be more. The exact opposite is true. You know, for me, talking about data or tech platforms, nothing's more likely to get me to glaze over and switch off. But at the same time, you know, not long ago, Bella from the Food Research Collaboration contacted me to do some research about our food hub, and she was asking for data. You know, I've recently read Henry Dimbleby's National Food Strategy, and I'm well aware that, you know, one of the key recommendations within that is for a national food data program. So, you know, so I'm well aware that data is an important thing, and so, you know, as a business owner, you know, I think, you know, that obviously means something to me. In terms of what I do, so yeah, so I'm the founder and owner of the Cambridge Organic Food Company, which is an organic box scheme enterprise, which has been going for, well, I think 24 years now. And that's, you know, if anybody that's sort of familiar with well, you know, the likes of Riverford, we do that sort of thing, but on you know, locally to Cambridge. More recently, we've been doing something called the Cambridge Food Hub, which is more of a business to business sort of supplier. Although I'm very keen to, I'm keen to stress that we're not a sort of a conventional wholesaler. What we're doing with the Food Hub is we're putting infrastructure in place which facilitates direct trade between local food enterprises, and perhaps more importantly, we're coordinating the supply chain in ways that meet sort of various social and environmental objectives, and in particular, perhaps I'd say applying what I might describe as circular economy type techniques to the supply chain. So we're seeking, you know, for all sorts of efficiencies, and not only to be sort of delivering goods and resources to establishments, but sort of picking up things at the same time. For example, we have a coffee grounds recycling program, and we're also, you know, transporting donated surplus food and trying to incorporate that into the sort of the more commercial activities, as I say, to try and just do everything a bit more efficiently and to sort of meet these social and environmental objectives.
Yeah, amazing. And I guess my understanding, doing such a kind of diverse set of activities, is that you're probably using a few different platforms. I mean, I know you're using the Open Food Network, but yeah, and I guess with the different parts of your business using different platforms, with, you know, the VegBox side and Boxmaster, you probably got a lot of producers that are actually on different platforms. And is that like quite a lot of work? Does it create a lot of challenges to do so much diversity with so many different software platforms?
Yes, so we primarily use two different systems. The box scheme is managed by Boxmaster, and we're using Open Food Network for the Food Hub side of things. And yeah, there's no sort of link between the two, so they both work completely sort of independently of each other. And, you know, the products and produce that appears on one, you know, has to be sort of re-entered on the other as well. I mean, I certainly think, you know, I think back to the times, you know, when we had our sort of very first websites, and sort of all of the laborious work that went into sort of individually uploading individual product data, you know, image, price, sort of various details about that. And you kind of think, well, it's all well and good for, you know, your, I don't know, buying a chopped tomatoes, you know, sell cases and cases of them. But then you think, well, you know, there are also going to be lines like, I don't know, what am I going to pick on? Jander's vegan lemon curd, which, yeah, you just know that you're going to sell, you know, half a dozen cases of it in a year, kind of thing, and you've spent all that work sort of updating the pricing, etc., and you know, you're only making sort of like 70 or 80p a jar. So to have, and you know, you then sort of multiply that by the, you know, all the other sort of small businesses that are equally you know, putting that work and effort into you know, something that's going to sell in fairly low volume. And I'd say it can also be a barrier. I remember when we sort of first started working with Hogmadods, who's obviously a business that I think the world of. But you know, I'm aware that they were already selling their products on, you know, 2 or 3 different platforms, and it was a barrier to, you know, it took a little bit of persuading to get them to sort of come on and become an open, you know, get them onto the Open Food Network as well, because that, you know, every time, you know, the price of you know, 500 grams of fava beans changes, or if they change their packaging design or anything like that, you know, they're just replicating over and over again the work of putting that onto the system. So yeah, but once you've got something that's a little more uniform, I see that opening the doors to so many other things as well, such as you know, stock availability of stock. If you can have like real time sort of stock availability things going on, you know, and so many other things as well, you know, the kinds of data that Bella wanted for her research, to be able to say, yeah, just sort of tap into this. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you've touched on so many important points there. So one of the things that often pops into my head in this work is that, as you know, as we move into more agroecological and more diverse farms, smaller holdings, but also more businesses on farms, you know, we're going to have, it's kind of a goal to have some of these products. Some will be like the vegetables that you can find a local distribution network for, but some are going to be those niche products like the lemon curd you talked about that are going to be really low volume and probably need quite a wide geographic area to be distributed over effectively. And those things will be coming from the same farms, meaning that it adds this kind of layer of complexity to food and farming systems that we need to be able to support if we want to be able to transition to an agroecologically, you know, defined food system. And I guess like another thing that pops into my head is that, in this kind of diversity of different platforms and managing different products and updating prices in different places, it kind of makes sense that that the model that is so dominant with supermarkets and farmers, big farmers having a single contract with a big supermarket and just having that kind of one transaction being how they define their business models. And it gives a lot of security maybe to businesses like yours as well, to have that kind of certainty. Is that something, do you ever think in that way?
Well, I guess we don't really have that same sort of single supplier relationship that that the supermarkets do. I guess when you talk in terms of the, I mean, sometimes I think you've got to call a spade, and one of the reasons that supermarkets are the dominant force in the food industry is because they really have they really are doing things well to a certain extent, but by which I mean they have created these systems. I sort of dread to. I haven't worked in the supermarket myself, but you kind of think of the Tesco club card or whatever, and you think the sort of access to data that they must have, and they are able to do things very efficiently because of that. I'd like we're the kind of like sustainability people. When I like to things, we do things sort of quite sustainably, but I would have thought as a proportion of stock, the amount of stock that gets unsold in a small scale farm shop is sort of a greater proportion than a local Sainsbury's. And likewise, one farmer who's taking 2 sacks of potatoes down the road in his sort of Citroen Berlingo is probably less efficient than a lorry that takes sort of 12 tons of them in a single journey. But I think it's really I say all that, but then I'm aware that the thing that unites everybody at this conference is that we see the inherent flaws of that system, and we're all striving towards something that's sort of better and fairer. And I think really it's how that kind of technology chooses to be deployed. So whereas the sort of mainstream supermarkets, what are the motivations behind that? Well, really it's shareholder profit. Whereas I think a similar kind of system that was really more focused on the needs of producers, especially small scale, and had different objectives other than sort of bottom line profit, but objectives such as minimization of waste, minimization of food miles, and that kind of thing. It really would be sort of quite powerful indeed.
Yeah, the logistics point is a really interesting one to touch on. Like, the example of the potatoes and the Citroen Berlingo. I know a lot of our food system, in the agroecological food system, kind of runs with this. Someone's delivered something on bicycle, or some quite small distributions that are happening. And I think this is one of the really key things that we can explore, and one of the potential blockages to diversity. And I wonder, if we are, as we are expanding agroecological and farmer-focused supply chains to be a much bigger share of the economy. You touched on logistics there, but I'm guessing that there's lots of other platforms and systems that need to have all of the data shared across them. And I wonder if you could just touch on some of those systems and maybe other implications that you see around scaling.
Well, I mean, I see really quite groundbreaking and sort of impactful ramifications for sort of developing a sort of a system on this kind of level. So the sort of the concept in supply chain coordination that we're sort of putting into practice at the Cambridge Food Hub is something that we call the local food ecosystem. And what how can I sort of quickly describe that? I guess the theory upon which that was built was kind of along the lines of one one farm converting to organic is great, but it's not groundbreaking. A single independent shop selling locally grown food is fantastic, but it doesn't make a huge difference. a restaurant switching its menu to entirely locally sourced ingredients is inspirational, but it isn't going to save the planet. However, an entire community of local food enterprises all working in unity as part of a sustainable food system, now that really could have a difference. Now, key to all of that is, of course, you know, a word that's cropped up, you know, both you and Kath have used it, is this of diversity. So we are, as an industry, so I find, you know, diversity is good. It's something that really should be embraced. And, you know, there's, you know, there's a lot of sort of disparate sort of enterprises who like to do things their own way. So how do you sort of bring in this sort of level of unity while still maintaining that diversity? I brought along a little visual aid here. I don't know if my camera picks it up. So this is a ratchet with a 10mm socket in it. And you know, with this ratchet, I can adjust the brakes on my bike, or I could probably have a pretty good go at starting to take apart a Boeing 747. I'm not sure I'd necessarily be able to put it back together again. But the point is, by having tools that are common to all, that allows people to be, you know, to explore their diversity, to do their own thing, but still to be part of something which is much bigger. So, and you know, if you sort of manage to achieve this and put those tools in place, that you know, it starts to mean that you can start thinking about you know, dynamic food procurement. You can start sort of trying to address those sort of big you know, those big markets and increase the impact you know, out of, you know, the sort of vanishingly small sort of percentages of the food market that we currently address, and actually start saying, you know, how can we really scale up? So yeah, yeah, I think that's just about me done, but I'm really supportive of everything that you're trying to achieve, Lynn, and hope you manage to crack it.
Well, yeah, thanks so much, Duncan. I think it's just incredible to have like your really direct experiences of these challenges that we're exploring shared so eloquently. So thank you so much. And I think it's a really lovely segue over to Rochelle, because as I understand it, these challenges are challenges that you guys at the Data Food Consortium started trying to crack the nut of maybe 4 years ago. So perhaps you could tell us a little bit about the journey that you've been on so far.
Yes, thank you, Lynn. Hello, everyone. I'm really happy to be here. Really excited to participate. So yes, I'm part of a project called the Data Food Consortium. And our starting point was really similar to what you, Kath, and Duncan explained. And so a lot of it will echo, I think. But I think that the first bit where we started to ask questions in France around how to do our short food system better was when we discovered that because we have this very diverse system of short food chain system. We have community supported agricultures, we have box schemes, we have buying groups. It's the same in the UK, I'm sure. And so there's this vibrant scene, farmers were also trying to use this scene to become more sustainable on how they were leading their businesses. So yes, we started to see farmers selling their products to different platforms to not put their eggs in the same basket, have a more sustainable way of doing direct selling. Because if yes, one tool, one web platform built by one startup ends tomorrow, then you still have other options to sell your products directly. So it's healthy to be on different websites. But also, like we shared, there are so many cases where to make your businesses more sustainable, you want to add additional services, maybe bike delivery, or you want to have better food waste strategies and so on. And this is only looking at the scale of businesses, but when you look at the scale of a territory, of a country, of Europe, then yes, you see that unfortunately, short food chain systems are not efficient yet. And we were mentioning logistics and especially delivery. One figure I can share in France is that if we want to feed France's needs in terms of food with agroecology, we need 2 million farmers. We could do it with 1 million, but these 1 million wouldn't have a sustainable living, not great wages, no holidays, etc., etc. So the goal would be 2 million. And so if we imagine these 2 millions with a Citroën Berlingo on the roads, then yes, we might have some problems. So we need more efficiency, and we need more collaboration on the land. So this is how we started talking between organizers of short food chain systems, but also software developer of platforms that were helping the short food chain system to organize. So around the table you had, for the most famous one, maybe in the UK, the Food Assembly, Open Food Network, of course, Cachette.net. Maybe these are platforms that you already heard. So these are the people who started talking together 4 years ago. And we were wondering how to do our work better. And what we come up with, we got inspired a bit by what the web is doing. And we have internet, and internet works with a lot of tools because these tools are following standards. And we searched a lot, but we didn't find any standards that could be applied to what we were doing, meaning tools for a short food chain system. So we decided to create a standard. And I don't want to get too much technical, but basically what the Data Food Project Consortium is about is really about, so building a standard. What does it mean? It means that we want to agree on a communication form, a language that all software should talk aside of their own language, just to be able to communicate. And agreeing on one language, one form of how to communicate data allows anyone who wants tomorrow to join the party and develop new services. If they follow this standard, they can. And so this is how we started the project, and what the project is about in a very summarized way.
Right. So essentially it's about creating a layer between different software platforms, where that layer means that they can talk to each other and internally to themselves in a similar way to how the web works. Is the understanding.
Yes, someone in the chat said the Esperanto for software platform. This is exactly it. Thank you.
Nice. And so that sounds like a pretty radical thing. Like essentially you got a bunch of competing platforms to come and sit around a table and work out how you could collaborate and how they could talk to each other in software language. And I guess that means kind of sharing things like their data models, like their business logic, to come up with this shared standard. Could you, it sounds like a near impossible task. Maybe you could share something about how that went and the experiences that you had during that process.
Yes, so and indeed, it doesn't feel natural at first because we are used to the model where we are entrepreneurs, we have an idea, it's obviously the best one in the universe, we build up something and we will win the market and be happy, which can be true for a couple of enterprises in the world. But I want to stress that it's really not I think we discovered that it's not really the mindset around the the market we are all in. And most of us around the table, we were humans just trying to have a better world. And the first thing we noticed, we just wanted the same world. We had the same vision, these 2 million agroecological farmers, but we have, of course, different ways to go there, different values, but in a way, we wanted to reach the same results. So this brought us already together in a way. And then, of course, just the reality of what we were doing is that, again, if we look at efficiency, we could have said, okay, yes, we are going to do partnerships and build bridges between our tools. So we have software A that is going to learn the language of software B, and we are going to map, and these two software are going to work. But in these cases, software A is doing a first, and software B are basically bargaining on the fact that these two software are going to stay on the long run. And they, by doing so, they also in a way, block themselves to software C, D, F that maybe are not born yet, but are maybe valuable to their businesses on the long run. So yes, on the short term, it will always be faster to develop something really specific for working with, oh yes, this accounting tool, but on the long run, we will all benefit and gain more efficiency and more business by following a standard. So yeah, I think everyone recognized this, and this is how we started and got together.
I'm muted, don't. Classic Zoom. So yeah, I think that's really inspiring to kind of hear that there's so much to be gained from that collaboration, even on the level of individual businesses. I wonder where you're at with the project now after some years of kind of working together and developing this. What have you achieved so far?
Yes, so for that, I will quickly share my screen as well, because building a standard is, on some ways, it's not complicated, but it can be a bit difficult to grasp. So as I mentioned, we were really inspired by how the web was built and how standards already exist in the web. And as we were mostly web platforms around the table, we got really inspired by this. So this is why also we looked at building a standard according to what we call the semantic web, which is a very interesting way of looking at the standard, because it enables us to first agree on a standard vocabulary, if I may say. This is what we call an ontology in the semantic web. And then there are technical standards. There are machines that will be able to read this ontology and go forward. So I think that the first milestone that we reached in 2018 was to agree on a first ontology, a first vocabulary that describes what we do, what we are, all the processes of a software platform. Around the table, we had lots of sales platform, training platform. So this is why also the first version is really focusing on that. That doesn't mean that we don't want to look at other aspects of the short food chain system. It's just that we were first trying to resolve the problem of the people contributing to the group. And so I want to mention that before issuing this main vocabulary, we had lots of indeed exchanges on understanding what is a product for software A, what is a product for software B, why people are doing things like this. One thing that was really healthy to understand and observe was that we all came to the same conclusion, because we did our job well. And so there was no big secrets revealed that some people never knew about. There are lots of knowledge that wasn't shared until our work, but that there was no big surprises in doing so. So this first agreement was reached very early on in the process. And the way we published it is that we all agreed that we would publish our work under open source licenses. So this standard is published on GitHub on our website. We publish everything in French and English, so you should all be able to contribute if you want to. This was really important to us, and it will allow me also to do and stress one particular point, because here today we are talking about data. And often when I say that we are building a standard that is published under open source licenses, people say, oh, you're doing open data. No, actually, this is really something I want to stress on. Data sovereignty, ownership of data is something we really want to nurture and keep. Of course, if for some reason the data owner wants to do open data with their data, they're free to do so. We are not against open data, but this was something that we really pay attention in doing the first version of the standard, is that we don't want to end up with the belief that if you are compliant to the standard, then you are issuing publicly data. This is not the case. The owner of the data needs to always be the one that agrees to share or not share his data to whom. We are just building a standard for the pipes that are going to communicate this data, which is a big difference. So yeah, this was really important to us, and it was also really important to us to build a standard that would not destroy the diversity of short food chain and the value of short food chain. Like we mentioned before, the diversity is what makes short food chain interesting, and why we also have so many initiatives that are inspiring. And so what we see in big supermarket infrastructure is that the standardization of processes and communication of data also imply the standardization of the product and processes in real life. And our work is really strictly limited to software. And these decisions should not have consequences on the type of product that are sold. So these are values also we shared all together, and we try to remind ourselves in our work. Of course, it's not perfect. We certainly do mistakes, but just to give you a hint of what we agree on when starting working together. So this first milestone was reached in terms of vocabulary, something very theoretical, I would say. It's a piece of paper that say a product is this and does this and is sold like this and this. And so to go even forward, we started to build prototypes, both in the platforms that were around the table, but also a standalone prototype. And basically where we started to look at some use case and very simple scenario, like, for example, being able to read product catalogs from different platforms and be able to edit these catalogs at once, for example. So this is the second milestone we have reached this autumn. So we are now able to read product catalog and, for example, update stock information on one click. This is where what we have reached so far, and yeah, so there are still many other aspects to look into, but building this prototype enabled us also to see the flaws in the first standard that we made. And now we are going to publish and document all the findings we had from these first prototypes and do a new version of the standard. So what I wanted also to say by this is that it's an iterative process where everyone is welcome also to join and contribute. It's not a fixed photography of this is the truth and we are the best in the world.
That's awesome, Michelle. I think it's really interesting to hear partly about like the amount of how involved this work is, that it is something that is so kind of beneficial, but actually takes a lot of work to get going. And I've seen people in the chat, you know, talking about different platforms. We know already that there are a lot of food platforms out there already. And I think we're going to see that number grow as our sector grows, because there are far more people trading in software than there are trading in farming. So I think we can see lots of platforms are going to come about. And the issues that you mentioned, Duncan, you know, as there are more different platforms with more different hubs and enterprises and business types popping up around the country, something we all want. But that diversity of platforms is not going to go away. And I think, you know, as well, Rochelle, it's really great to hear you talk about the values that you're bringing to this around kind of open source. This is not about anyone being able to profit from intellectual property, but actually it's about creating a kind of commons and open source commons that benefits the sector rather than any individual corporate business. And I can see like the potential for huge benefits to wider collaboration as well. We are running low on time, so I might jump over to you now, Sophie. I don't know, I hope I'm not breaking up because Zoom is freezing for me. So let me know if you can't hear me, but my computer is not handling this call very well.
Fine then.
Okay, that's great, thank you. All right, so yeah, Sophie, I think it would be great to maybe just hear from you around some of the plans after learning around the Data Food Consortium in France, the plans that are afoot in the UK.
Absolutely. I'm really quickly going to share my screen and yes, announce, well, the UK Food Data Collaboration. So behind the scenes, the Open Food Network have been doing lots of exploring, lots of discussing, lots of inviting people to the table to try and garner interest in the same sorts of activities that have been happening in France with the Data Food Consortium. And we're really pleased to say that so far we've been able to bring around the table the Land Workers Alliance, Sustain, Better Food Traders, as well as lots of different platforms as well. So the Open Food Network, Boxmaster, Ubi, and Big Barn as well. So we've all been discussing and plotting and planning, working our way towards a very big, exciting development, which is the UK Food Data Collaboration. And what's even more exciting is that we are funded for the next 2 years. We are really, really delighted to announce that we've received just under £495,000 worth of funding from the National Lottery Community Foundation. They are the largest funder of community activity in the UK. And in 2020 alone, they distributed over £1 billion to charities and community organisations across the UK. So we are so happy to be part of this funding, and we're really, really looking forward to making a start soon. So big thanks to the National Lottery. So
I am not, oh great, my computer's back just in time. If I cut out at any point, because I think my computer's about to have a heart attack, please just continue without me. Yeah, but this is incredibly exciting news, and it'd be great to hear a bit more about what the plans are for this project, if you could, Sophie.
Of course. So we have two core strands of work which are going to take place. The first of those is around governance, and that's developing governance practices along the lines that Rochelle has already described happening with the Data Food Consortium, really with a commons building approach at its heart. So what we want is for this to be a collective endeavour for farmers, producers, farmer-focused supply chains, workers and tech platforms, of course, but ultimately this is all going to be benefiting the communities they serve. Second up, we have the technical strand, where all of the nitty-gritty stuff really starts to happen. And Rochelle's already mentioned the word iteration. So the first task there is going to be to iterate on this DFC standard to suit and adapt it to the context here in the UK, with the hope that we'd then be able to integrate the platforms involved to enable that key data interoperability between platforms. And the ultimate aim of this is that we're supporting farmers to more easily sell via multiple hubs. So people like Duncan and hopefully lots of others as well. And what we think perhaps is going to be one of the key benefits as well is particularly supporting larger farmers that want to transition to supplying food hubs, we very much hope, and who need to supply multiple hubs to be able to do that, to be able to sort of really do that with much more access and ease than they otherwise might. So that's why the governance strand in particular is so important. We want to ensure integrity throughout this process to ensure that agroecological principles are really at the heart of this project as we go through. So it is the start of a very, very exciting journey.
Can I unmute? Yes. Yeah, this is, it does feel like a very exciting journey to be embarking on. Very experimental, quite scary, I have to admit, but really exciting. And it's just, you know, we've heard a lot about how and why this is so needed through this session. If anyone is interested in getting involved or hearing more about this or potentially being collaborators, is there a way that folks can do that?
Ta-da! Yes, there is. So we are obviously very early days. We haven't yet, you know, officially commenced the project, but you can certainly get involved at this stage. So if you're interested in keeping up with all of our news, there's a link there to the mailing list. I'll pop it into the chat for you as well. That's a really easy peasy way to stay up to date with us. If you've got any specific questions or you want to be a part of the food data collaboration, I think, Rochelle, you said join the party earlier. So this is your invitation to come along and join the party. And please do email me there. My email address is there. And again, I will pop it in the chat. And there will be some more updates coming soon via the Open Food Network UK social media channels and blog. So yes, just to reiterate, we'd really love to hear from you. So please do get in touch.
Amazing. Cool. Well, lots of bits and pieces coming in the chat. People excited. So thanks very much for all of your enthusiasm. And we've had a few questions pop up over the course of the conversation, which my computer is completely dying on the chat. So if I've missed any, then feel free to repost, jump in, anything like that. But yeah, it will be, I think it's time to move over to questions. We've got about half an hour left. And if you've got any, brewing in the back of your mind, even if they're half formed, then I'd love to see them pop up in the chat. We had one come in at the start from Peter Sampson saying that kind of some of the conversations that we were talking about suggest there might be a need for a centralized data hub. And I wondered if perhaps you could talk to Rochelle why from the Data Food Consortium perspective, it's been important to think about data standards rather than centralized data.
Yes, very interesting question indeed. Well, I think that there was various debate indeed, even in when we looked at how technically we are going to do that. And yes, even if you want to do something very quickly, it's easier technically to say, oh yeah, dump all data over there, and then you can query the data very easily and read them and do stuff. Even with something very, very precise in terms of data permission and so on, this is something often people think about. But then you ask yourself, okay, the dump where you put everything, who owns this dump, and what is the governance that is really interested over this? And then it can become complex. And the fact that we found decentralized technological solution really got us thinking that this was the way to go, because we didn't want to become a standard that would enforce some specific criteria on how the data would be used, because there are so many use cases where you can do stuff with the data, and some that are value aligned with the group we were at the start, and some that maybe weren't, but who knows in the future how this group wants to change and evolve. And so this would not grow if we would think really in a centralized way. So thinking in a decentralized way allowed us also to say, okay, if there are people who are not agreeing to this way of managing the data, they would still be able to keep the data stored somewhere else and decide whether or not they are sharing the data according to the standard pipes we have thought of. So this is why we decided to focus on how to communicate the data and not how to force people into sharing all the data at some places, and leave people sovereign with doing what they want to do with the data. So yes, it doesn't solve the problem of looking over the trenches at some point, because yes, there are many groups who still don't want to be sharing anything. They're a bit afraid of that for now, but that's a different, I think that's something technology maybe shouldn't look into. It's more how we communicate, how we explain to people where their power relies, what technology can do, and what they can choose to share in what form. It's called, how is it? Is it the raw data? Is it anonymized data? Which type of data, etc., etc. And so yeah, the first stage for us was the pipes, and then when we believe that once we have the pipes, we are able to do more afterwards.
I wonder if we could jump in with one of the questions from the chat. So I'm just looking at the question we've had from Ari. How do you convince farmers that data is valuable to them? I worked in a small farm in the Basque Country that knew all of their customers, sold all of their produce at a price that was sustainable for both the producer and consumer. And, oh, I've lost the rest of the question. And yet some of their orders were phone calls and handwritten notes. So this might be the case, you know, for a lot of producers here in the UK as well. There was no data collection. So I think the question, yeah, what would this actually bring in terms of value to a small farmer, such as the one described?
That is such a good question. Can I jump in? I think that data should only be used, and these kind of systems should only be used if they're bringing value. So if that farmer is doing perfectly fine selling eggs or meat or whatever it is through their own systems locally, then we don't need to interfere with that. It might be quite useful for us to know something about their farm, but a chat might be just as good as data collection. This is about when people want to trade out to organised markets elsewhere. So whether that's an urban population, a hospital, into a procurement contract managed by dynamic food procurement, you know, at that point you need data. So it's really about the ambition of the people who are selling the food. You can imagine that a lot of community supported agriculture networks would have, you know, some of them will want to get into this much more complex relationship with their members. Some of them will have an Excel spreadsheet or a back of an envelope. And if it works, that's good enough. You know, obviously for policy reasons, we would like to have more data about the size of the sector, the value of it, the volume of it, what it needs. But that can happen through other types of research as well as data collection. I'm not trying to undermine the data at all. But once you get into dealing with 1,800 veg bags as are packed at growing communities every week, once you get into wanting to supply into school supply chains and get coordinated, once you want to go into a local food hub, then you need to know about volume, value, what's needed, ordering systems, invoicing, and those kind of things. And that's when systems like this can help.
Can I add a little something to that particular question as well? In all my many years of working this, I've always failed to convince farmers of anything. So anybody that can convince a farmer is. I know Ben Reynolds had addressed a question to me earlier on in the chat, so I might sort of jump in and sort of pick on that one. I believe that in fact is Ben sort of here and able to unmute and just ask the question out loud? There he is.
I am here and I am able to unmute. Sorry, just jump in there. So lots of wonderful sessions at RFC already, and the listening into the session earlier today and hearing from Locavore, hearing from Better Food Bristol about their models where they have expanded and added in different elements, so markets, box schemes, retail, cafes, linking with growing projects, and I was interested in how that compared to, I think, the model that you were describing of local food ecosystem, which probably held all of those components but run independently. And I just wondered what you thought, Duncan, or indeed anybody else, about the pros and cons of those two different approaches, both in terms of that ecology of businesses and successful enterprises, but I mean, obviously in the relevance of this session, whether there is anything around data sharing. But yeah, I don't know, Duncan, if that sort of extends or sort of clarifies on the question I put in the box.
Absolutely, yeah. No, I'd love to jump in on that one. So I think, you know, whether it's done sort of within an organization or whether it's done sort of more in the sort of wider system, there's a great deal to be said for having a diversity of routes to market. I guess you could say, in some ways, I'm doing exactly what Locavore and Growing Communities and the place in Bristol have done, because, you know, I was formerly just an organic box scheme, and I've diversified into this sort of business to business sort of side of things as well. But I think one of the points that I'd like to make, when you've got a one of the things that we want to move away from is what I call linear supply chains, which result in you know, a singular sort of point of sale. So that's, if you like, that's the conventional retail model. Now, an extreme example of that, and apologies for anybody that was in our session earlier on and hears me repeat myself, but with the sort of surplus food redistribution work that we do, you know, just literally 2 or 3 days ago, I had to go around to a local church that literally had 5 tons of fresh produce given to them by Sainsbury's, which were over the road. So that's 5 tons of Brussels sprouts, clementines, carrots, and lemons. Now, there's no way on earth that the network of food, you know, the community food hubs around Cambridge are ever going to be able to make a dent into that. But, you know, that is, you know, that's the retail model kind of gone wrong. And OK Christmas is an extreme example of that. But the point is, if you've got a diversity of the routes to market from that, and retail by necessity always has to overorder, because you've always got to be presenting the consumer with you know, with abundance, otherwise they're not going to grow. But if you've got other sort of ways, you know, what sort of hasn't been used by the retail side of things, if that can go into sort of the cafe next door, or you know, be redistributed to sort of community food hubs, or, you know, as long as you've got sort of like different avenues. So don't think linear, think ecosystem.
Can I really agree with you there, Duncan, and also bring some experience of working with organisations that do multiple things. And one of the best things I've ever been through is processes where people understand the role of each of the thing within that ecosystem and therefore value it. I once worked for a very large institution down in Devon who kept saying that the kitchen wasn't profitable. However, they ran a hotel. You can't run a hotel without a kitchen. So the kitchen did not need to be profitable in its own right. It needs to be understood as an essential part of the whole offer. And there's something about the ecosystem way of approaching things where once you understand which is the bit that's the engine and which are the bits that serve that engine, again, I'm using mechanistic analogies, I don't mean to, but then getting some clarity about that. We went through a process, as myself as a trustee at Growing Communities a long time ago, to really understand what was the economic driver that makes Growing Communities a success. That's not to say that some of the other things aren't a success, but it's not the economic bit. So the economic bit is the veg box scheme. That gives the volume of demand to the farmers. It's the organised way of having, you know, large scale contracts, those kind of things. And the farmers market is a brilliant way of connecting the farmers directly with the people, but it isn't in its own right an economic driver for growing communities. This is 10 years out of date. I might be misreporting, but at the time, this kind of analysis helped us to understand that we were quite happy for the farmers market not to be making a lot of money in its own right for growing communities, because it was doing a really good job for the farmers, which is part of the primary purpose of the organisation. The veg box scheme was the economic driver. The salad growing didn't wash its face economically, but it was an essential part of the offer and an essential part of the story. So we've always been happy to let that, to some extent, be not quite subsidised, but understood for its role within the organisation. And I think when you start being able to analyse that and understand the ecosystem and the roles that the different parts play in it, you wouldn't have a growing communities box scheme without the salads. It's not trying to say that there's anything less value about that, but the economics of it is driven by the volume orders that go through to farmers and helps them give them a living. So there's something about that kind of analysis. It can be quite painful to go through in some ways, because things that we hold dear might not be washing their face financially, but they may have other values, and therefore we might find other ways to support them, either through cross-subsidising or through grants, or through just going, what the hell, we don't want to do it anyway because that's part of who we are and what we do. But understanding where those money flows go is vital.
Yeah, absolutely. What I really like about what you both touched on there, Duncan and Kath, is this kind of, in my mind, it becomes like a fractaled way of looking at our food system, you know, like the produce goes through networks. It doesn't just go through linear supply chains, and the businesses are also interoperating in this networked way rather than just in these kind of siloed linear ways. And this feels like it really mimics kind of natural systems, and hence, if we can, you know, the kind of infrastructure that can support this networked and fractaled approach really feels like the kind of infrastructure that we want to be focusing on. So,
and I was really struck that Ben mentioned the Better Food retail in Bristol, run by Phil Horton. That they said that having a kitchen nearby and part of their ecosystem has been vital, because that deals with the surplus. You can make soup with wonky vegetables and the last bits of fruit and veg that are left over. Not fruit so much, obviously, for the soup. And that kitchen is part of that ecosystem. And like here, where I live, there's Made in Hackney, which is this wonderful social enterprise who cooks with a lot of surplus food and is subsidised to, and has done a very successful crowdfunder recently to use good food to feed people who are feeling isolated or unable to access food during the pandemic. Wow, amazing people, love them. There's something about that, understanding the roles that all of these organisations play. That one ought to be being supported by local authority, because actually it's providing a Meals on Wheels service by another name. You know, how do we make sure that those continue to be paid for and don't just look like they're charitable initiatives that are mopping up problems downstream? It's like, how do we build this in and get the right money to the right places? This is where data can help, is to understand the costs of those things and to understand what it would take to integrate them and to know where that money should come from. Should it come from social services? Should it come from GP practices? Should it come from the NHS? You know, because that is providing an essential service. Yes, we can also subsidise it with our surplus through trading schemes. We could do pay it forward schemes to help with our local friends who need some support. But understanding it through the data, the costs, the money, and becoming really quite hard-nosed about analysing that is really important, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're getting close to the end of the session. I wonder, Rochelle, if you wanted to touch on Susan's answer. I think you answered it to Natasha in the chat, but that's okay. I think that's what happened. Did you want to talk to that in any more?
Yes, I was typing an answer to Susan. Thank you so much for the question. So it's a very short answer on that is that yes, on some cases we noticed that our work cannot just stop at the pipe. It should sometimes describe a little bit more. An example was when we started our prototype and started to read catalogs from different product catalogs from different software, we noticed that even though we all thought that the product was something very simple. A product has a name, a picture, a description, and a unit, and maybe unit size, and yeah, something just very, very simple can turn out very different, because, well, in the reality, people will use the different field a bit differently to make their product look nice on the website, which ends up with sometimes units being displayed also in the title, and etc., etc. So we discovered that, yes, on some form we need to be really describing very well what we expect in terms of format and output. So I'm not sure if that's what you thought when you mentioned data points. And in any case, I would be, we don't want to reinvent the wheel if something exists somewhere. So yeah, really looking forward to collaborate if the Global Farm Metric has already some valuable data points that we could refer to in our work and use. That would be nice.
Yeah, maybe to jump in here that we are part of the stakeholder group for the Global Farm Metric work. So definitely very interested in aligning where the alignments make sense. And I think there's a huge opportunity there to kind of align some of this data, and they're essentially get different standards talking to each other. It's one of the powers of using standards, which is an excellent thing. So I just wanted to, I know that you answered Martin's question earlier, Sophie, around the timescales of the project. Another question from Martin around, can we get funding to create the infrastructure nationally? Shall we touch back on this?
Well, I think it's fair to say this is, the very, very first steps towards something that could become national. So as we said, this is really, really early days. But ultimately, it has the potential, but would obviously, as you say, require a lot of funding to be able to take it national. But this is, we have sown the seed. Well, in fact, the Data Food Consortium have sown the seed to begin with, and we're so grateful to be able to stand on their shoulders for the purposes of the Food Data Collaboration Project in the UK. So, I mean, yeah, it would be an amazing ambition to have, and let's see how far we can get.
Awesome. And yeah, did you want to jump in there, Kath, as well? I can see you chatting away.
Well, that's the thing. I'm now wanting to chat with all the people in the chat. Hello. So something came up about local food infrastructure, which is this phrase that now rattles out of my mouth. Local food infrastructure, all the things that need to be in place for local food systems to work, whether that's drying rooms, processing places, packing sheds, warehouses, the data, the trucks, the electricity points to recharge the trucks, the connections between farmers who are encouraged by whoever is working with them to get in touch with better food trading systems, the data that tells them they're going to get more money for doing so. This is the kind of big task we have ahead of us. And there was a wonderful bit in our last session this morning, which we keep on talking about, where I asked Phil Horton from Better Food in Bristol, what's your inspiration, you would say? And he said, just get started, get on with it. That's what all of the people who've made things successful have done, is they've got on with it. And I think we have now the knowledge and models, as I mentioned when I was talking before, to do that, and a lot of generosity within the network, that people are happy to share stuff, and for that not to go into private hands. And I'm always suspicious of data platforms and things that are about private profit, because I just don't think they'll last. And I also think that, you're handing over a lot of your own knowledge, food, love, care, attention, data to a system that may not last. That's quite a big risk for people. So anything that can help to de-risk that and to make it more shared and to make it better for farmers to trade well is great.
Absolutely. And I think that call to just get started is such a powerful one, because you don't learn about the barriers in a system until you have to solve them. And that's exactly at the heart of it.
I've been approached many times over the year in my position at Sustain by people saying, oh, I've created a platform that's going to solve it all. So many times I can't even believe it. And I used to have a set of questions. I threw it away recently because I just couldn't stand having the conversation anymore. But the questions were things like, have you talked to any farmers yet? Have you talked to anybody who's done this trading before? Do you know about the different models for how people? Oh no, I've been sitting in my bedroom doing my computing. I don't mean to undermine things, because actually some people have done some fantastic work as well. But there is an element of, we've got to, these things are iterative. The systems and the data systems need to learn by doing as well. You know, as Rachel was talking about, they can't work without being adaptive, and they can't work without incorporating the diversity, because it's a very diverse system, as we know from all the people who are coming to our RRC. That isn't a preaching any kind of doom on this, because I think it can work, but it's got to be grounded in the practicalities and grounding in real trading. I remember we once got some lottery funding to do some work with wholesalers in Manchester about getting more organic and agroecological food into the wholesale system. And then, bless them, the lottery wanted loads of data about, you know, who they were reaching and stuff. And the trouble is with data, it has to match the business needs as well. It was very difficult to get wholesalers to talk about end user customers because they don't have any. Their wholesalers sell to businesses. So there has to be an understanding of who we're talking to, what is the business case for them collecting the data at all, and also how the products, as Rachel has been talking about, match to that, and really be very adaptive. So, you know, that's the game we're in. It's great fun.
Absolutely.
And the proof of the pudding is in the bags of carrots that get moved, which is great because it's real.
Absolutely. And being able to tell that story about those real bags of carrots is such a powerful one. We are approaching the end of the session. We've got about 2 minutes left. Did anyone want to wrap up quickly? Maybe Sophie, Duncan, Rochelle. Anything to add before we wrap up?
I'll just say, well, thanks very much, Lynne, for inviting me to speak. Thanks everybody who's sort of come along to the session today. It's really, I always love seeing there's several sort of like familiar names that I see in the audience. So pity we could be, as you said at the beginning, it's a real shame we couldn't have all been in a room together and sort of like had a beer afterwards or whatever together. But it's lovely that you've all come along to this session today, and thanks very much to those who have helped organise it.
Absolutely. Well, thanks so much for being part of such a brilliant panel. And the conversations will continue, obviously, until the revolution is complete. Is there such thing as a complete revolution? I'm not sure. Let's just find out by doing it. So yeah, thanks very much, everyone. It's been a real pleasure to have this session and to have all of your incredible questions and conversations. And I look forward to continuing these chats as the Food Data Collaboration Project continues